Why did Tigris help in the Hunger Games and become a stylist if she's such a morally good person? The short answer is that people can change and their views can change. And it has been 65 years since we last see Tigris in The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes to when we see her again helping Katniss and the rebels in the final book. And unfortunately, that is 65 years where we don't know much about what happens to her. There are a couple things that we do know. We do know that Tigris becomes a stylist in these games. And we can see the starts of this in The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, where Tigris helps Lucy Gray look better for the cameras by loaning her a dress for the interviews and by fixing Lucy Gray's rainbow dress for the arena. And since we see Tigris already in this stage that early on, we can assume that she soon after becomes an official stylist for these games. And I think for Tigris, she genuinely believes that she is helping these tributes. It's throughout The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes where we realise that Tigris and Snow, despite having near-identical upbringings and near-identical experiences in the war, they have incredibly fundamentally different outlooks. This is my cat. She does not want to be held. And I don't think that Tigris ever really agreed with the games. And we don't really get a deep look to Tigris as a character, because the only perspectives that we get to see her through are Katniss and Snow's. And Katniss meets Tigris at the end of Mockingjay. The rebels have made it to the centre of the city. They are so close to Snow's mansion. And they take refuge in Tigris's shop. And because Tigris is upstairs and gathering intel, Katniss doesn't really get the chance to get to know her at all. We learn from Cressida that her and Tigris know each other, and so we can assume that Tigris knows about the rebellion. But considering Tigris seemed genuinely surprised and slightly horrified that Katniss and the rebels showed up, we can also assume that she wasn't an active part of the rebellion. She wasn't going to help it that much, but she also wasn't going to stop it. And this might be because we find out that Tigris is Snow's cousin. She has an incredibly strong connection to him, and she might have been heavily monitored. It's possible that Tigris saw her helping in the rebellion as a liability to the rebellion. The other perspective we see Tigris through is Snow's, and his perspective is incredibly biased. He paints her as this sweet, gentle thing who is not all that bright, at least compared to him. And so both Snow and Katniss do view Tigris through the lens of someone very vulnerable and very delicate in a way. Snow a lot more so because we actually get to know her a bit through his point of view. And this doesn't mean that Tigris is inherently stupid, it just means that she's not the master manipulator that Snow was. Tigris also doesn't have that insane grip on legacy that he does. The second Snow moves to District 12, she essentially sells the apartment. And this can be read one of two ways. Either Tigris is making the decision that Snow was never strong enough to make, and she's selling the apartment and she's starting their lives anew when they can actually afford it. Or it can be read the way that Snow reads it, and it's that Tigris is giving up. She's not much of a fighter. She's not one to engage in confrontation when necessary. And we see this 65 years later where Tigris helps the rebels but doesn't actively put herself in the line of fire. And so from my perspective, I see Tigris as a character who is always trying to help people the best way that she can. And a lot of the time, a person's best doesn't always involve them being on the front lines. And so Tigris becoming a stylist in the games, I think was her way of genuinely helping them as best she could. She would help them look their best and she would help them present their best self. And if nothing else, she might have given them a bit of confidence when everything else felt hopeless. It's a very similar thing to what Cinna says to Katniss in the first games. He's there to help her get through this as best he can. Because they know the games are wrong, they know the games are barbaric, but what can they do just being one person in the world, one person stuck in the capital? So they help the best way they can. And Cinna especially was given an opportunity to help even further. I do think it would be interesting to know how Tigris evolved as a character through those 65 years. Because although at the end of The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes we can already see her distancing herself from Snow, there was clearly a lot more pain that she herself suffered and that she had to watch others suffer at his hands. And we know that within those 65 years she met Cressida and she met Plutarch and she likely knew about the rebellion. And at some point during those 65 years, she started to smile at the fact of her cousin dying. And Snow and Tigris were so bonded as children. They suffered the same fate and at times they only really had each other. And so it could be that for a lot of the years she was still holding on to that child that she knew, that boy who would hold her hand through the darkness. So I don't think this question is as easy or as cut and dry as is Tigris a good person morally? Because I don't think that any of these characters are meant to be viewed through the lens of good or bad. I think everyone has a morally grey area and that's where the really interesting stuff happens. And I think the most important thing is that Tigris did try to help people in the end.